Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Thomas Neeson, I'm Managing Partner at Condell, and today I'm really pleased to welcome you all to our webinar, which is on blue-green infrastructure. I think this is probably the 10th webinar we've run weekly. I've probably lost count, like the weeks of COVID, I've lost count, but yeah, we've probably done 10, and this week we're moving outside of buildings and looking at the infrastructure that works around our buildings. We're obviously meeting in challenging times, still in the middle of COVID, and I know we've got some let up in parts of the world, and some of our offices have returned to working in the office, but some are in and out, and the situation's changing constantly. So we will continue to run webinars to educate, hopefully, and illuminate areas that we work in, and look at when we all return to whatever normal might be, how we minimize impact on the future or design future for the planet. Sustainability at Condell is obviously at the core of everything we do, and today's webinar is just one that supports our published sustainability roadmap in delivering on our cornerstones of sustainability, which are how we impact on our homes, our workplaces, our projects, and our communities, and how we provide some industry leadership, some thought leadership in driving forward the combined knowledge of the sector and ways that we can all help each other. Today's webinar will be about 30 minutes long. Michael, like all of our other presenters, tries to pack an hour of information into 30 minutes, so there'll be quite a lot to skip through. We've got a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, so if you would like to ask questions, and please do, put them in as they come into your head, and we'll have a session at the end of picking up all questions. If we don't have time to answer them all, we'll email you back answers, and of course, we'll be happy to come and talk to you separately afterwards in more detail for anyone who wants that. So today's speaker is Michael Hurst. Michael's a civil engineer and he's an expert in blue-green infrastructure. Michael comes from the west of Ireland, where there's a lot of blue falls out of the sky and makes it all quite green. So he started off from an early age of experience and what the impact of managing these things are. He's an alumni of both Sligo and Galway Institutes of Technology. So early in his career, Michael decided with Condell to go and try a different environment and went to work with us in Qatar for a couple of years, experiencing a very different environment to be designing in. So generally mostly dry, mostly hot, but subject to some fairly intense flooding events as we're finding throughout the Middle East, and flooding will be one of the things that Michael will pick up, and the impacts of flooding and how we mitigate against that in the world going forward. And we picked up on that in one of our earlier webinars too. But he got fed up with the dry, so he came back to Manchester, proving that really he's a water baby at heart. So I will hand you over to Michael. Enjoy the webinar, get your questions ready, and let's have some debate and discussion at the end. Enjoy the webinar, and we'll see you at the end. So over to Michael.
Thank you, Thomas, and good morning to you all. It's a pleasure to speak to you this morning on blue and green infrastructure. Most of you probably know Condell already. Just a quick introduction. We've got over 950 people worldwide. And at the moment, we're operating basically as 950 offices through the COVID-19 crisis. We've done a project in 50 countries. And one thing to note about Condell and sustainability is this year we're aiming to go net zero carbon across the business. And this slide just to show you where we operate. Yeah, we've got quite a spread around the globe. And we've got quite a number of services. Many of you will have used some of these services, but come and speak to us. We get involved in all aspects of engineering consultancy. So what is blue-green infrastructure? So the phrase blue infrastructure mainly relates to water and how it's used in a development. So this takes the form of many will be familiar with SUDs or water sustainable urban design or other phrases that are used around the world. But it also relates to existing infrastructure such as our rivers, our lakes, our ponds, our harbours. Then the phrase green infrastructure relates to anything that's kind of natural, any planting that is used, again, for development purposes, but has got a certain benefits it gives, such as biodiversity, amenity, or air quality. And together, these come together as a nature-based solution to manage water for the benefit of the environment and for society. And I just want to give you a couple of examples of blue and green infrastructure and the stuff that we should be encouraging developments to look at. So the first one of these is trees. Trees are quite simple, and especially where you can design a system that directs water into the base of trees. So trees through the uptake of water reduce the amount that's going to drains, but also the roots provide good benefits by drawing out those pollutants before it passes on downstream. Other use of trees, I can use them in reed beds or little forests that can help reduce sort of rainfall runoff and give wider benefits. Many of you are familiar with green roofs. They give a good opportunity to introduce green infrastructure in our urban environments where space is quite limited, and roofs are generally just used for plant and equipment. But actually bringing in some green roofs, and if thought about in advance, can really open up even an amenity use to these spaces. Green walls, simply hanging vegetation to the side of buildings. These can also enhance certain large infrastructure, such as big retaining walls or motorway underpasses. So it's a good opportunity to introduce vegetation to these areas too. Rain gardens are a very simple feature. They can be used in open spaces or in very tight controlled areas, and are simply just a depression in the ground where surface water can overland flow into them, or you can direct some rainwater downpipes from your buildings into them. Typically be planted with a variety of hard species of planting, and can be really quite attractive features. So attenuation basins are typically thought of as just big holes in the ground, but they don't have to be. You can incorporate attenuation basins into your landscape and make them very attractive and very usable spaces for the end user. These are largely just remain dry for the most part, but may have a little channel in the center of the basin just to pick up that low flow of water. Swales are another aspect, not to be confused with attenuation basins, as I sometimes hear it. Swales are primarily used for collection and conveyance of water, and they can just take very simple landforms in the landscape. It's a simple V cutting here, and they can be planted with just a simple verge and maintained just such, or can be let grow wild, or you can introduce some very enhanced planting just to really up the visuals. They can be incorporated with underground systems to really enhance the function. Ponds and wetlands, these are permanent water features and have obvious benefits for water volume control. Plus, they also add a huge amount of biodiversity and amenity uses for the end user. So integrated construction wetlands, these are a bit more specialized. These are typically are provided in areas where there's an existing pollution problem or there's an effluent discharge into an area that's near wetlands. And basically you're enhancing these areas through engineering solutions, through natural systems, through soils, so that the inherent systems allow the degradation of these pollutants and the capture of these pollutants before it passes on downstream. Another thing we want to just to point out on water use in developments is that water really should be looked at as a commodity. So every year, huge amount of resources are directed towards sourcing, treating, and the supply of high quality potable water to our developments. But when when you look at what these are used for, there's a high amount of water going towards uses that just don't need that high level of treatment. And also the traditional uses or traditional approaches to development was to direct the wastewater as quickly as possible to the sewer and away from development, and often paying the same supplying company to take away that wastewater. What we'd like to encourage is looking at dealing with water as a commodity and reusing it, putting in systems to recirculate it through your developments. And there's many systems out there that provide capture, storage, and treatment, and active volume management to allow you to reuse it for irrigation purposes, for water features, landscape maintenance, for toilet grey water reuse, for example. And as we noted here, it can actually save you up to 40% per year on the potable water that comes into development. Other benefits for blue and green infrastructure is the amenity provision. So we're providing more green spaces for people. They're more attractive, more well-being aspects, and also it can provide for like food production. So why is blue-green infrastructure on the agenda? So many of you may have tuned into some of our previous webinars, particularly last week's on climate resilience. And the discussions about that really, you can see that through climate change, flooding is just going to increase into the future. Studies and results of data collection over the last few decades have shown that it's getting wetter on average. Like the Met Office in the UK has recorded that the last decade is 1% wetter than the previous 2 decades and 5% wetter than the previous decades before that. The UN's International Panel on Climate Change has projected that the UK's storm intensity is going to increase 10% year on year up to 2100. And this is obviously has other implications, particularly when sea level rises are occurring as well. It's in the UK, the sea level has risen by 17 centimeters in the last 120 years. And on top of this, the paved areas across the UK are increasing. It's been noted that front driveways have been paved over a rate that double that in just the paved driveways has doubled in the last 20 years alone. Plus, there's been 1,600 new miles of new road constructed in just 18 years. To compound this, there's a lot of loss of upstream natural landscape. So this is stripping of vegetation on our hills and mountains that open up for agricultural purposes, but we're losing that protection for rainfall on these hills, causing water to move a lot more rapidly downstream. Then a lot of cities and development areas are located in low-lying areas, so we've actually ended up with a lot of loss of natural floodplain. In fact, there's been over 1,000 hectares of natural wetlands overpaved in the UK in just 6 years, and exacerbate things in old sewer systems. They were designed in Victorian times in the UK, so now they're at or at least beyond capacity and aren't really designed for what's coming in the future. Also, we've got an increase in drought and water stress. So in the UK, we're seeing hosepipe bans quite regularly occur now. In Australia, there's areas that used to have drought occur once every 20 years. Now these has certain areas that are almost in constant drought. And this is, it's been shown by earlier in the year that Australia does terrible wildfires. Also, it's been long recognized that our cities are being overpaved, which is interrupting that natural water cycle, allowing that natural infiltration into the ground underneath the city areas, and this is having a number of effects. So it's interrupting the replenishment of the groundwater aquifers. It's also drying out soils, and certain soils then have shrink, and this has big impact on foundations in places, but also can actually contribute to the whole city area to actually shrink. Biodiversity is another big problem, and it's an increasing problem across the globe. Extinction is being talked about heavily for a lot of animals. In fact, in the UK, 15% of species are threatened with extinction. This is also compounded by there's a general just reduction in the abundance of all species out in the environment. And another thing is the bee population collapse has been widely reported, and this is a huge ongoing problem. And in fact, bee population has dropped by a third since 1980. Also, our natural ponds are being lost quite an extreme rate. 90% of the UK's natural ponds have been lost in just the last 120 years. And I've already mentioned about the wetland loss that's compounding this as well. Air pollution. So the WHO considers air pollution to be the greatest environmental risk to human health, with over 90% of human population living in cities where their health guidelines are being exceeded. And in the UK, this contributes to roughly 40,000 deaths, and also adds to about £20 billion of cost per annum. But actually, good news in developing countries, the air pollution is generally been on a decline. There's still problems in the cities where we've got NO2 and PM temps remain high. Developing countries are struggling with this, and actually. These problems are being compounded by the increasing in hot and sunny spells, which kind of stagnate the air and hold it in the cities, and just add to the general air pollution. And then we've had the increase in wildfires, as I mentioned earlier. So there's days where smog is blowing across the cities, and kind of real problems for people with respiratory illnesses. Also, the general heat of cities reacting with these air pollutions can actually have an effect of increasing ozone contamination in the environment. So we are aware of contamination in the environment. We're particularly aware of historic contamination from industrial sources, and mainly in the form of the hydrocarbons and oils. Plus, also recently, we've been made more aware about how plastic is impacting our environment. There still remains a lot of other contaminations that we don't really think of. Silts and debris, so them being washed downstream very quickly, can have big impacts on certain areas. Heavy metals get washed off our roads from cars, etc. Nutrients just generally getting into the water courses can have a big effect. And pharmaceuticals is now being understood to have quite a large effect on wildlife. Urban heat, another big problem. So our cities effectively have their own local mini climates, with the likes of London has recorded an average 1 to 3 degrees warmer than the surrounding countryside. And this is mainly influenced by a number of factors. So basically, sunlight has an uninterrupted path through to our cities. And then when it hits surfaces there, we got metal surfaces that heat up quite quickly. We got concrete surfaces that store heat and release it back slowly. And then glazing, it traps and amplifies heat. So there's a lot of heat being provided just from the natural environment. Plus also the overpaving prevents that water infiltration, and also there's the loss of evaporation effects. So there's a loss of natural cooling effects there. And then also your cities, they're concentrated energy users. So it's there's a lot of sources in there for urban heat. And this only looks for solutions such as increased air conditioning, which is increased energy production, which only compounds the climate change that we mentioned previously. So what has been done about it? So you'll be aware there's a lot of discussions around sustainability in the international community. So the cities are, the UN has set out its sustainable goal objectives, and there's Cundall have been involved in lots of talks around these and trying to promote these in everything we do. So you might be able to tune into some of the previous webinars to have a look at our thoughts on these. So the UN Sustainability Goals, they're there to achieve a better, more sustainable future for all. And blue and green infrastructure actually touches on 9 out of these 17 goals. Other international influences, like from the EU, they've adopted their sustainability development strategy, and now has become a basic objective in everything that they do. Any international negotiations, any internal policies, all get measured against this. And this is a good framework for promotion of sustainability agenda among member nations, but also people who want to work with the EU. And so then governments are unveiling this obviously through planning, regulations and policy that you're aware of, such as in the UK, that's the National Planning Policy, the Planning Practice Guides, Sustainable Drainage Policies, the National Policy for Waste. So these are policies developed to help local authorities develop and guide developments so that they meet these national and regional goals, not just for the development itself, but as in the wider picture. And in Cundall, we're getting involved in this. So we've been involved with the London plan that's currently out for draft consultation, and lots of these problems that we discussed earlier are major targets for improvement through this plan. One of these initiatives is the Green Grid initiatives, which recognizes it like an interdependent network of green infrastructure and how we can provide benefits across the city region, not just on a local level. And it recognizes that there's multiple benefits to blue and green infrastructure, whereas traditional methods only deal with one thing. For example, an attenuation tank only deals with water volume, where a pond provides for water volume, water quality, biodiversity, and much more. It tries to promote well-designed, well-managed systems, so that again are interdependent on the other systems around the area. So it's not just one site dealing with it and the next one not, but trying to have that whole inclusive strategy. And similar local plans are in development up and down the UK, but also throughout the world as this agenda moves forward. In the past, multi-agencies are responsible for the rollout of these initiatives, but in the past, lots of these were set up to focus on one specific aspect. And that, has had its own challenges because they're set up in this traditional approach. So what worked for one mightn't work for the other. But actually, what we're seeing now is coming together. And in certain areas, we had really good success, like in Scotland. A lot of the agencies are still owned directly by the state government, so they've been able to roll out things quite smoothly. Likewise, throughout Europe. Maybe the rigid structures weren't in place as such as they are in some other places, so it's allowed them to adapt quite quickly. In England, we've actually seen a very poor uptake in blue and green infrastructure, and there's been lots of reasons for it. There's lots of systemic barriers in place. Lots of these agencies are quite independent, and some of these end up being they are private companies. So engaging with these has been quite a challenge over the last number of years, but thankfully this is starting to change. So the sewer companies have got involved quite recently, and they've actually unveiled their new code for adoption, which now allows for the adoption of SUDS features. So that'll accelerate the program, hopefully, within the UK. And Cundall have actually been quite involved in this, and we've been involved in some trial schemes on how these would function within the requirements of the sewer companies, but also advising on how the guidelines should come together in the new code. Then just to give you an example of how we do this internationally. So we've done a lot of projects in the Middle East, in Asia, through Hong Kong, Singapore, Shanghai, and across Australia. So we've got quite a good knowledge of sustainability consultancy, and we're involved in lots of master plans and projects throughout these regions. And we do like to get an early involvement, and that way we can really set up a strategy that works well. For example, this image in front of you is a development in Oman. And again, building on that experience from around Europe, Asia, and Australia, we've been able to create a bespoke sustainability strategy here, which encourages and utilizes the blue and green infrastructure. And what it's done is actually enhanced the scheme and really brought forward as a development. I just want to quickly go through some of the benefits that you'd associate with blue and green infrastructure. So the first one that comes to mind is stormwater and flood management control. So we've got good interception by blue and green infrastructure. And some studies out there have shown that the rate of runoff actually can reduce by up to 40% and in certain circumstances. The shape and profile of these infrastructures actually retain more water within their shape than, say, a flat, smooth concrete surface, which would just shed water straight off into the sewer system. So more water is being held in upper areas of the site. Infiltration allows water to get back into the ground and recharge the natural water levels, and further reducing that volume of water is directed downstream. And then you've got the evaporation transpiration effect. So plants use the water, and so this allows you then to have a less of reliance on your your hard and your grey infrastructure. There's less concrete pipes, less pumping stations, less need for concrete tanks, etc. Plus, swales such as this in the image here provide for dual use, so they're providing that conveyance, plus they're providing a flood storage where a pipe can be quite limited. Once it hits its capacity, you're basically flooding out onto the ground, whereas a swale like this has got huge amount of capacity. And the other thing is these are quite simple to install. Essentially, you're just digging a hole in the ground. It also deals with storm management and flood management on more of a regional scale. As you can see in this picture here, we've got multiple basins dotted around the landscape. These are all linked, and they provide a level of resilience to each other so that the flood risk is further reduced across the entire campus. But also what we'd encourage us to get involved at more of a strategic regional level. And sometimes if we can go and speak to local planning authorities, we realize that they're doing some important flood works nearby. And we'd encourage conversations about these to get involved. Maybe you can offset some of the requirements on your site by investing in strategic floodplains elsewhere. Also, we'd encourage local or regional wetlands to be identified and protected, because these got huge capacity to deal with floodwater and the likes. And these are not just areas that are a waste, and they should be used for the function that they really provide. Other things that we try to encourage maybe is to look at upstream catchments where vegetation has been previously stripped, and reintroducing that sort of vegetation cover. And this will give further resilience to the downstream areas where the more developable spaces. Clean water is another big benefit of blue and green infrastructure. Simply by passing the water through the vegetation, pollutants are captured within the vegetation, within the soil mass, within the root mass, and this can filter out heavy metals, particles, plastics, silts, and hydrocarbons. And once they're captured, then they cannot go on to pollute elsewhere. Biological processes occur within the system so that there's breakdown of some of these pollutants, and also just by having the vegetation there naturally slows down the movement of the water, so there's less movement of silts downstream, there's less erosion of banks. Lining the green infrastructure as well with vegetation gives it shading, which cools water. So cooler water has more opportunity for biological life to flourish, and can actually enhance the treatment of the water. There are tools out there that we use, like there's the Syria tool that we use to quantify the benefit of each of our infrastructures and how they're going to remove pollutants. And even so, these figures are quite conservative because other studies out there have shown quite an enhanced effect. In areas of contaminated land, the blue and green infrastructure has actually been used for quite a long time. The UK Coal Authority has used trees to plant existing spoil heaps, and essentially what they're doing is binding the soils together to prevent that contaminant mobilization, or actually preventing the effluent from building up. But also where effluent does actually occur, they've been using basins and lagoons lined with green infrastructure again to catch the effluent before it's discharged and into watercourses. For example, this image is from one such lagoon for a project that we're currently looking at. So air quality, you'd associate with plants. So yes, green walls, green roofs, green infrastructure can remove heavy metals and airborne particles and VOCs from the air. Also, the surface of vegetation can allow just those pollutants to settle out onto the surfaces. Some studies have shown that there can be a reduction in these pollutants by up to 30%. And in fact, there's one I've seen where it showed it up to 60%. But there's still quite a lot of work to be done in this area. DEFRA's working group has only identified certain small percentage reductions in like PM10 and an even smaller effect on NO2. And also we need to be careful about which plants we use, because certain plants actually give off volatile organic compounds naturally. Another thing to consider about clean air is that actually some vegetation might impede the disbursement of air. So some big trees that overhang the space, they can confine air. So we've got to look at the shape of the streets to really introduce the correct solutions, such as green walls in narrow spaces, introducing shrubs and low hedges when it starts to get a bit wider, and only bringing in trees when you've got a widened space. There's better ways to do this, looking at how we can actually segregate the pedestrians and the traffic. Examples are pedestrianization of the highways, or creating barriers between the road and the pedestrians. And one thing to note is that this consistency, density of planting has a better effect. Urban heat. So exactly opposite to what I was saying earlier, introducing green infrastructure creates that barrier to the direct sunlight, stopping the direct contact with the unnatural surfaces. It's got shading for windows. Also, you got the evaporation and transpiration effect, that just the process of them cools the air. And then you're also allowing water to get to the natural soils and infiltrate, further providing a resilience to the heating effect. So planting has some effect on noise, but is limited. Mainly noise is influenced by the distance from noise or how orientation is. You can introduce barriers, but where green infrastructure can really benefit is introducing a softening to the landscape rather than having hard surfaces which reflect noises. The soft vegetation actually absorb some of that noise, so improving noise. Carbon emissions is something a lot of people look at as planting trees to offset carbon. Now you can see that carbon has, or planting trees has, it's a limited uptake of carbon initially, because you're starting off with a small sapling. It's not until it grows into full maturity that the effect of carbon is really at its best. So it's a long life return on carbon capture, and same with other forests. But there are other movements out there. So there's Wacky Forests, which are dense urban forests, and these are the 10 times denser planting gives it 30 times more benefits, and it also has a 40 times increase in the carbon captured through the process because they grow so quickly and so densely. And it has an added benefit of being actually up to 100 times more biodiverse. Other benefits are the kind of the indirect savings. So the benefits that we talked about earlier means you're not introducing these active and mechanical processes. And also then you're reducing the amount of production off sites for infrastructure and the transportation associated. So we got a layered benefit. Big side effect of green and blue infrastructure is just the inherent habitat and biodiversity that comes with it. We do work quite closely with landscape designers and ecologists to try pick the right solution for the right situation and really enhance that benefit. There's lots of studies out there by Syria and others to demonstrate the benefits to the biodiversity, not just in a social sense, but also in a pure economic sense. These are quite measurable factors. And then we've got placemaking and quality of life. So more green spaces, more well-designed blue infrastructure really enhances placemaking quality of life. Can offer a lot of benefits, educational benefits, recreational benefits, health and well-being benefits. It's also shown to have positive effects on traffic calming. So people may feel more relaxed around it, so they drive slower. Studies also show there's a measurable decrease in crime rates when in neighborhoods of trees and good green spaces. And another study is showing that productivity is a measurable increase. The City of Trees charity has found that for every £1 invested in trees, it has a £69 return on productivity improvements over a 50-year period. And in fact, when they account for all the benefits I talked about earlier, they have £229 return for every pound over that 50-year period. So there's lots of benefits there, and what we would like to encourage is not just sort of the traditional view of green and blue infrastructure. Traditional costings could sometimes miss the multiple benefits and the value that blue and green infrastructure can bring. So we want to have those discussions with you, but obviously this is not that easily measured. And there are tools out there which can be used. For example, the Environmental Agency has worked with Syria and others to develop the BEST tool, which is a way of quantifying the financial, social, and environmental benefits. It's a very structured approach to these benefits and evidence-based to the cost of assessments. And it's something that's encouraged to be used by local authorities, management authorities, planners, landscape designers, and engineers such as myself. So compares the natural infrastructure, which I've been just talking about, versus the more traditional likes of flood walls and pipes. And it really recognizes the multiple benefits there and quantifies on a cost point of view to really show that the whole life benefit of providing blue and green infrastructure. The tool also gives recommendations about related or possibly interested partners and may open up other funding avenues, such as with educational people. So there are many other tools out there which can be used to demonstrate the benefits of blue-green infrastructure, and we would like to encourage this to be done at the outset of a project where the benefits can really be captured and developed through the project. And yes, please get in touch with us here at Cundall to discuss further if you would like. That's really what I wanted to say on the topic. Before I hand it back, I just wanted to point out that there's a couple of other upcoming webinars. So next Wednesday, we have a webinar on active travel and the benefits of reallocation of public spaces by our own Neil McAlpine and Kathy Russell from Ryder Architecture. And then the following Wednesday, we have this CIC carbon assessment tool provided by Jonathan Yao and Helen Amos. And I just want to say thank you for your time and thanks for attending. Cheers.
Thank you, Mike. We've got a few questions for you when you're ready.
Mm-hmm.
Can a green wall comply with the post-Hackett fire considerations?
That is an interesting question. It's not something I'm very familiar with myself, so I probably have to take that one away and see if we can answer that another time. Is that okay?
Yeah.
I think Ahmed and our fire engineering team will probably have plenty of advice on that. So if we know who's asked the question, we can certainly get it answered.
Somebody commented green walls are fine if they are wet.
Yeah, so you do need to have an irrigation system provided as well, and have that sort of recirculation. And there's many systems out there. And what, again, I was touching on earlier, if you're looking at capture of water and allowing it to be reused for certain aspects like irrigation, then you can have multiple benefits.
Yeah, the next one is not an actual question, it's more of a statement. Just a note for drainage directed to tree pits. The base of tree pits needs to be connected to the drainage system or to be on fee draining subbase to allow excess water to disperse to prevent creating anaerobic conditions that would be detrimental to the health of the tree.
Yeah. So there's lots of systems out there where it's all set up with the drainage infrastructure provided around the base of the tree. There's use of some confinement systems and special soils which promote this flow that's needed for the health of the tree, but also providing the water method to get away once it gets to a certain level.
Okay, and then we've got, you describe well the many layers of BGI. Plants play an essential role in the success of these, relying on judicious selection, combinations and placement of plants for their successful performance. Where are the decisions taken on plant specification for BGI in Condell projects?
So this is where we work with landscape designers. So again, I like to get involved quite early with the landscape architects to talk about our solutions and bring the landscape features and SUDS features together, and we create a space that works not only just for the drainage point of view, but also from the planting point of view. Only certain plants will grow in like in a wet environment. So those discussions needed quite early, and yeah, you can get some really good benefits if you have those correct conversations. But it is something that needs to be done from the outset. There's no point doing it in different silos because you won't get the benefit. It needs to be a collaboration.
This answered the next question because it was if we have any horticultural specialists in our team, but you answered the question that we use external consultants. You mentioned that the construction of domestic driveways is problematic in relation to flooding. I believe that planning legislation since 2008 has required planning applications to be made for laying impermeable, unattenuated driveways for domestic driveways. However, most domestic clients and driveway installers don't know anything about this legislation. How significant is the flooding issues from domestic drives? How can domestic clients and driveway installers be educated about these requirements?
Yeah, it's an interesting issue. Yeah, you're correct that planning does ask for this, but yeah, the information is just not out there for general public. It's quite a hard topic to address because you're basically addressing the layperson who's not actively involved in, say, webinars like this, or and in a lot of cases aren't even aware that they're not complying with planning. They think they're just doing up their front yard. I don't think it's an easy answer to really give, but as the significance of it is increasing. It seems to double, I think it was in the last 20 years, I said. So it's still increasing. It's still a problem. But maybe things will improve in the future when the reliance on cars is looking like it may decrease, and so there might be opportunities to encourage the repurposing of front driveways back into being soft landscapes and encourage that tree and plantation again. But it'll take a time. It'll take a lot of education of the general public to get to that point.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna do 3 more questions, and then if there's any more, we'll reply by sending an email. What are your thoughts on the balance between green roofs and PV panels on roofs in terms of solar hierarchy?
Oh yes, no, that's an interesting question, because both have got their benefits. You got energy production from PV, but then you've got the inherent kind of cooling and other benefits and water control that you get with green roofs. I would have to say it needs to be assessed on a project base and looked at which benefits actually end up being the most productive for that development at that time, rather than just saying one answer suits every situation.
Okay.
I think you're competing with space for MEP plant and probably amenity space for residents on quite a lot of buildings. So we've been involved in quite a lot of schemes where you're trying to balance those 4 aspects, and to the extent of where we've had PV above brown roofs and attenuated roofs as well. So you're trying to get multiple functions out of the same limited amount of roof area for most buildings.
Somebody
commented. It's like all design is going to be a compromise.
Somebody commented and said biosolar roofs, combine the 2.
Yeah.
Will the swale be a nightmare for ongoing maintenance, such as collection of fallen leaves in winter and weeds growing in summer due to its V shape?
Yeah, they are natural growing spaces. So yes, there is a chance that weeds get in there and there are leaf collection issues. So it's back to providing actual maintenance when it's needed, and not just ignoring problems as they build up. So yeah, people seem to not like to remove leaves, but if a gully gets overlain with a load of leaves, then it loses its effectiveness. So we do need maintenance of generally just for drainage infrastructure to avoid flooding issues. And then when planting or when weeds get in there, it's addressing the weed problems as they arise, and it needs an active management, like pretty much all our infrastructure needs that active management, but it's just a different way of thinking about the maintenance that is needed.
Great. And last question for now. There's loads of questions coming in, but we will answer those in emails. What benchmarks are available to quantify the multiple benefits of blue-green solutions on urban projects, stormwater, flooding, biodiversity, heat island, etc.? Is there a tool that combines all of these into a metric to allow comparison between options?
Yeah, I'll go back a couple of slides. Maybe this tool that's I'd reference you to have a look at. So it's you can Google it, and most of it is downloadable. So this is what the EA has put together. We worked with lots of partners to try to bring those cost benefits together. So this is actually giving you that monetary value of all these multiple benefits and trying to give you that advice. And again, of course, there are other tools out there as well that look at specific aspects. So there's a lot of studies and a lot of research going into this to try really show that value rather than just comparing like for like. Hopefully that helps. I can obviously send on links to this if.
Well, we're going to send out a link to the webinar anyway,
yeah.
So we could add that in there. And I mean, I guess it may be different and more or less developed in all their countries around the world, but at least people can have some information as to what might apply in this country.
Yeah. We've got a few more questions, but we will email those. So Audrey and Kazi, we will email you the answers to your questions. Thank you for them. Anyway, and thank you to everyone for joining us. And as Thomas mentioned before, we will be sending the recording of this video shortly. And they're all saved on YouTube channel. So we encourage all of you to have a look there for our previous webinars. And we look forward to see you all for our next ones.
Thank you all.
Thank you everyone for your attendance, and see you at the next one. Bye for now.
Bye.